Good afternoon and welcome to the Atlantic Council. I'm Jason Marczak, Vice President and Senior Director of the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center. Thank you all for being here with us for this post-election discussion, which actually culminates our series titled Mexico's Path Forward, Framing the Next Sexennium. I am delighted, absolutely delighted to be joined here in studio by U.S. Ambassador to Mexico, Ken Salazar, who is joining us, Ambassador, for your first public comments following the June 2nd election and win of Claudia Sheinbaum as President-elect of Mexico. Ambassador, it's really wonderful to have you. All this room here, as well as those joining us virtually, know how you are such a champion of our bilateral relationship, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to give a little bit of context to start the discussion, then I'll jump into the conversation with the ambassador. Mexico's election on Sunday was, of course, the largest in the history of the country. The results are clear and actually historic. President-elect Sheinbaum, to be Mexico's first female president, won, according to the PREP, the Preliminary Electoral Results Program, 59.35% of the vote. She won by a 31.5% margin over her second-place challenger, Xochitl Galvez. But also impressive is the fact that she won in 31 of 32 states. She even surpassed President Lopez Obrador in 2018. And as well, being not only the first female president of Mexico, but also Mexico will end the year with 13 states that will now be led by women governors, which is absolutely impressive. And Morena itself will go, and its allies will go from governing 5 states in 2018 to 24 states. In Congress, Morena and its allies will have the supermajority in the chamber and within striking distance in the Senate. We've already seen one announcement that the Finance Secretary, Rogelio Ramirez de la O, who was actually ambassador, I think, in that seat here in April, that he will be staying on in his post as Finance Secretary. And so to discuss all this in further depth, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined here by our incredible ambassador, Ken Salazar. Ambassador Salazar was sworn in as U.S. Ambassador to Mexico in September 2021. Since then, he has continued to demonstrate his deep commitment to our bilateral relationship. His work speaks for itself, whether it's countless cultural heritage projects, his commitment to enhancing security and efficiency across the border, the dozens of investment opportunities he's helped to bring into Mexico, from clean energy in Baja to technological advancements in Querétaro. In addition to that, beyond being ambassador, he has a long history serving as Secretary of the Interior, Senator, Attorney General for the great state of Colorado, maybe I'll say, rather than just the state of Colorado. So I want to, again, thank you, Ambassador, for all your incredible work and for joining us today at a very busy time. And I'd like to begin the discussion by asking your initial thoughts on the election's outcomes.
Sure. So first of all, Jason, thank you to you and to Adrienne Arsht and to the Atlantic Council, because you lift up the importance of this most consequential relationship for the United States of America. And you do it countless times here in this studio. You do it through your trips to Mexico City. So I just want to thank you and Adrienne for all that you do. And yes, it is a historic time. When one thinks about it, I ask people, step back just for 1 second. Would one have imagined 50 years ago that you'd have a woman president in Mexico and that she would be of a Jewish background and with a name like Sheinbaum?
Yeah.
And how she becomes, in the history of our humanity, in the history of North American modern governments, the first female president. So just for one moment, one has to step back and just say, wow, it is the arc of progress, if you will, as Dr. King used to say, of the moral universe. So there's a lot of excitement about that. So the fact is, yes, she won with a resounding victory, unquestionable. It was a good day for democracy. And I think we in the United States should be celebrating the fact that we have democracy being fulfilled in Mexico, as we also go through our own democracy tests here in the United States and other places around the world. So it is a good time. It is a bright time, and I think a good forecast for the future on the relationship of United States and Mexico.
And the democracy too. Seeing the results. I unfortunately wasn't able to be there this past weekend, balancing my daughter's dance recitals. But I've been
important.
It's important. But I've been there in the past to observe elections in Mexico, and it's clear how rigorous and technical the process is in Mexico. How good of a job the National Electoral Institute does in carrying out the democracy in Mexico and carrying out the respect of the results, and being very quick to count the votes, provide an indication for the Mexican people, and then also the security of the voting stations themselves.
So on Sunday, I went by probably 7 or 9 polling stations, and people were there to exercise the right to vote. Long lines, very orderly. And then that night, as the results were coming in, we were obviously watching a number of different outlets, including following the website of INE. I was impressed the way that they did it, and then the way that INE took its time to come out with its statistical analysis, which surprised a lot of people because of the margin of victory, but it was respected. And I think it says good things about this Mexican election and about INE and how it ran the election.
And not only were the results respected and the candidates respected those at a presidential level, but we saw that across different electoral races as well. Some of which the results quickly the candidate that lost would go out and respect the results, and so it really shows some of kind of when there's democracies under threat, oftentimes in different parts of the world, the fact that the Mexican democratic system showed itself once again this past weekend.
Very much agree. Great exercise in democracy, and hopefully we see a lot more of this around the world, because it's one of the things that unites us, right?
Yeah.
So one thinks about North America and the economic integration, which we now are saying, I mean, we are the #1 trading partners in the history of humanity.
Yeah.
But we can also be the North Star in terms of upholding democratic values.
That's very true. Now, Ambassador, what key announcements will you be looking at as part of the presidential transition over these next few months? We've already seen one announcement. I mentioned the Finance Secretary staying on. What else are you going to be keeping your eye on over these next few months?
So we're engaged with the transition, right? Giving them our ideas. Obviously, they're the sovereigns, and it's with all due respect because they have their own way to figure out what they want to do. But we also have experience in having worked with Mexico for a very long time. And so we will be giving ideas to them, as will the entire world. But I expect that we'll see this period of transition as one where President-elect Sheinbaum's team will be leading a fulsome transition effort with a selection of key personnel, and also getting ready to govern October 1. Mm-hmm. It's not that far away.
It's not that far away. No, it's a pretty quick transition. Looking at October 1, what are going to be some of the issues that you're hoping to prioritize as ambassador working with this new government as she takes office?
So, Jason, what we try to do, okay, we don't take sides. We don't vote, and we don't influence the outcome of the election in Mexico. It's a Mexican election, and the Mexican population decides their leadership. But what we do is we engage. And so from way back, we've engaged with Dr. Sheinbaum's campaign at the time, and also with Xochitl Gálvez and others. And the points that we made to them and papers that we wrote and that we shared with the campaigns underscored the same issues that you and I have talked about on this stage before. It's how we work together as one North American family to address both the opportunities as well as the challenges. And so the same agenda that we've had since President Biden came into office is the same agenda that we shared with both campaigns and personally with both candidates. And now you have a president-elect, and so we will engage with the transition team to further the relationship in this transition period while we continue to work with President López Obrador on the reality of the issues that we face today.
So a number of key issues that you've been spending a lot of time on as ambassador, and that are key to the bilateral relationship: security, migration, trade, commercial relations among them. We'll start with maybe migration because of the announcement from just yesterday, where President Biden issued an executive order that prevents migrants from seeking asylum when the border crossings have reached a certain number on a daily basis. How do you see building on current mechanisms to address migration flows in this next presidency? And maybe what would you like to see prioritized? Is it kind of the continuation of the conversations that have been had thus far, or are there new issues that you'd like to be able to prioritize?
So one has to understand the context that we're in, which is for the first time in our history, we are working to address the issues of migration, both the challenges as well as the opportunities together. That never happened before in the history of the United States and Mexico that you know so well. And so the work that we have been doing is work that we see deepening and continuing with the president-elect when her team comes in. In the meantime, with the current Mexican government, with President López Obrador and Secretary Bárcena and her team. And there's complete alignment on what we have to do with respect to how we conceptually address the problem. The first is root causes. No one wants to leave their country. You know, Secretary Blinken often refers to it as the right to remain.
Yeah.
You know, people want to stay where they are, but they're driven out because poverty and political issues and a whole host of other things. But that's where we are aligned. We have to address the root causes. And secondly, we have to provide the humanitarian support for those who do get on the migrant trail. And we have to provide lawful pathways for people to come, whether it's to Mexico or to the United States. So the president's order yesterday, to me, was clear. What it basically said is for irregular migrants who want to come to the United States, there's two options. You can come through the lawful pathways that have been created, including existing ones like H-2As that have been there for a long time, or newer ones like the CMVH humanitarian parole programs. You can come through those lawful pathways.
Yeah.
Or if you come through unlawful pathways and you come between the ports, you're going to be removed, and there's going to be consequences for you to attempt to come into the country through those unlawful pathways. So I think the choice that is being put out there is clear. And in order to implement it, we're going to continue to work very well with a whole host of countries. Guatemala, for example, with its new president, there's a lot of attention that we in the United States and Mexico have on the Mexico-Guatemala border, on development in Guatemala. So there's a lot of opportunity there to work together.
I was down in Guatemala. I actually spent Valentine's Day with the new president in Guatemala, not with my family. On the migration, also the executive order issued this yesterday. It reflects the continuing conversations that are so important between the U.S. and Mexico, right? I think it's important to highlight that it didn't catch Mexico by surprise. That this is part of the fluidity of the relationship, the fact that there's so much communication between our government, between yourself, and those on the Mexican side about how do we work through some of these shared challenges, and how do we build on some of these opportunities, as you were saying.
Jason, so if one thinks about the last several years, our high-level economic dialogues to enhance the economic relationship, our high-level security dialogues, countless trips that have been taken by the United States Biden cabinet for meetings that sometimes last hours and hours with President López Obrador and his team, the Mexican team coming here to Washington and other places in the United States multiple times. It's that kind of communication that partners have. And to basically cut off the communication, as happened for the prior years, doesn't do anything for us as partners to really solve the challenges, and at the end of the day, create the opportunities that really help the citizens of both the United States and Mexico.
And all indications from the campaign are that President-elect Sheinbaum has a very similar approach, of continuing those conversations, especially on the migration front, working collaboratively with the United States and finding that shared solution to border issues that obviously impact both countries.
Sure, and it's important, though, that we don't define the relationship through migration or the border only, because we are, first of all, the largest trading partners in the history of humanity, and we ought not to lose sight of that. And the business community knows that, the Mexican government knows that, we know that here at the White House with President Biden, so we got to keep that in mind. Security issues, we got to get to security in a way that addresses the real security challenges that we face on both sides of the border. Migration is one of those challenges as well as opportunities that we have to solve. And there's a lot of innovation that is taking place. But yes, it is the kind of communication collaboration, open door dialogue. Sometimes there's disagreements,
Right.
But you try to find solutions, and that's what partners should be trying to do.
Right. Partners know how to voice those disagreements and then find solutions to them. You mentioned the importance of commerce, and we spent a lot of time here focusing on the U.S.-Mexico border, how to improve commercial flows at the border, recognize the fact the border is also a hub for not only goods, but also our people that cross the border so frequently, our culture and how intertwined our U.S.-Mexico cultures. But there is inefficiencies at the border that lead to discontent. Our reports have found that a 10-minute reduction in wait times at the border can lead to $312 billion in additional commerce for the entering the United States, and also create 18,000 direct and indirect jobs in Mexico. As we think about how to build on this commercial relationship, Mexico is now the #1 trade partner of the United States, and so important the U.S. beyond just the battle relationship. As we look at a changing global order, which is what we do here at the Atlantic Council, the importance of strong U.S.-Mexico ties are going to be even more important for U.S. competitors on the world stage. What steps can both countries take to improve some of our commercial pathways and also improve on some of the things that are working well on the trade front, but also address some of the trade inefficiencies?
So the border itself, frankly, for 200 plus years, it's been a broken border. And it's been put together essentially, as we would say it on the ranch, by a bunch of baling wire and twine and tape, right? And so there's never been significant coordination between the United States and Mexico on the border. It's one of the things, hopefully, if Congress had passed the bill that we asked, we would have been able to have done much more in terms of investing in the border with technology and the like. That said, because of the strong dialogue that we have with the Mexican government now, we are working on projects together. We want to share technology. We want to make sure that technology along the border is technology that serves the national security needs of the U.S. and Mexico, hence U.S. business and U.S. technology to be used on the border. We want to share the data so that you don't have to duplicate efforts on one side of the border and the other in both ways. So the modernization of the border remains a challenge, but it's one that we've laid the foundation to do some really great things in the years ahead. My simple vision on all this, President Biden's vision is we have an opportunity here to create an example of what truly is a modern and 21st century border. But you have to do it together. You have to have Mexico being a partner in all this.
Yeah, and it seems like there's a willingness to be able to do so, willingness to have that greater coordination. We've seen some of that, especially kind of some of the specific ports of entry. And also you mentioned technology and that real opportunity for infrastructure changes to be able to improve some of the efficiencies at the border and really maximize the fact that Mexico is our #1 trade partner. So how do we provide for greater facilitation of that trade?
Absolutely agree, and I think there was examples of where that is being done. It was a couple of years ago, you could only inspect maybe 20% of the cargo that was coming from Matamoros over to Brownsville. Today, we can do almost 100% through NIE equipment. So there's just a lot of opportunity there, and with the right kind of support here in the United States, and I mean it on a bipartisan basis. And the senators and members of Congress who come from the border states really get this.
They do,
that we can modernize this border so it's a border that we can really be proud of.
In addition to the border, our commercial relationship has the foundation of the USMCA, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement. This will be something that President-elect Sheinbaum will have as part of her plate when she comes into office. The approaching July 1, 2026 marker for the sunset clause, but congressional legislation mandates that process has to happen, at least in the U.S. side, much earlier insofar as reviewing the agreement, seeing what's working, what could be improved upon. And this will be something, a priority for her and her team as she comes into office. What do you see as some of the issues where there's joint cooperation or joint opportunities to improve upon USMCA as President-elect Sheinbaum takes office and as we approach this review period?
So I think it's an important time to, first of all, celebrate the successes of USMCA. The results are in relative to our trading relationship and the commerce flow that we have back and forth. We also know that we have tremendous support for the USMCA on a bipartisan basis here in the United States. And as near as I can tell, it's a unanimous support in Mexico from all parts. So I think the opportunity there is is to take a look at it and say there's lots of things that are working. The labor provisions, for example, of USMCA are creating tremendous benefit in Mexico to workers, which is one of the reasons why USMCA is really the modern template for what we ought to be doing in agreements, because what it does is it has its chapter on labor rights, and that's been a great success. So we ought to see what's working, see whether there are some things that need to be changed. But at the end of the day, when you have a commercial legal framework, as we do with USMCA, that's what's creating this integration of the economies of North America. Yeah. And so I think it's going to be continued. There may be some changes and some suggestions on a few changes that need to be made. But I feel good, and I think the president-elect, I've not talked to her specifically about USMCA, but she is very much committed to this integration of North America. I think the way Mexico has seen this is you create economic integration of North America, making it this economic powerhouse in the world, with that being phase one. And then phase two, there's a lot of the rest of the Americas that need to be brought along, so supply chains into Central America and other places. So it's going to be a continued work in progress, but I think we're in a good place.
You mentioned also looking at USMCA and how do you extend some of those opportunities across the Americas. That's part of the many pages of the Bipartisan Americas Act, mentioning USMCA, mentioning kind of the possibility of how do we extend upon some of the different clauses in the agreement to other countries in the region. We do a lot of work here on nearshoring, and how do we convert nearshoring from rhetoric into reality. And part of that is, I always say, how do we better integrate not only North America, but also bring North America to have a further reach into Central America and into other parts of the region.
I so agree, and it's interesting that as President-elect, the only appointment that I think she's made public is Ramirez Rogelio de la O.
Yeah.
And he was one of the people who helped conceive back NAFTA, but also now USMCA. But he I saw the paper that he sent me a few days ago where he was sketching out what the North American integration looked like and how nearshoring post-pandemic, how that was such an opportunity for North America.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's going to continue on for some time as the head of Hacienda, head of their Treasury Department, I think bodes well for this integration on the commercial side that we're talking about.
And that announcement has also helped to somewhat calm the markets as well, because we've seen the reaction, the hit on the peso immediately after the election, and that announcement was made, and we've seen some kind of greater stability afterwards. So that that announcement came at just the right time for multiple reasons.
I think it's what the doctor ordered.
It was what the doctor ordered.
It was good.
As we look at USMCA as well, one issue that we oftentimes hear about is the concern about the amount of increase in Chinese investment that's coming into Mexico, and how do you, as ambassador, and also kind of as you're thinking about kind of the conversations that will be had with the incoming team, there's a sense that there's a concern about that, not just from the U.S. side, but many people I've talked to in Mexico as well are concerned about the influx of Chinese investment that's been coming into the country. How do you see that potentially playing a role in some of these discussions that will be had probably beginning relatively soon, beginning next year, as we approach the review period of USMCA?
So I think Mexico in general would rather do business with its neighbor, right? I think that's the lessons, if you will, of the pandemic, about having your supply chains close to you. And so whether it's in the semiconductors or other aspects, other sectors of the economy, there is that recognition, right, that there's a preference to have this relationship with the United States for all the reasons that we just talked about. That said, the reality of it is, China is playing hard. They're competing hard, not only in Mexico but in other places. And Mexico will make its own choices. However, Mexico, in my view, is much more benefited by having this relationship with the United States as we share technology, as we share the challenges and opportunities on healthcare and so many other sectors. I sometimes look at it through the lens of climate and renewable energy. It's an existential issue. The president-elect of Mexico was one of the authors of the IPCC report. And so how we move forward with North American integration with respect to carbon-free clean energies, modernization of grids, the sharing of technology, all that is very much, it's an exciting time because I think we're going to be able to achieve some of those things.
We're also going to be sharing a World Cup very soon as well.
2026.
Yes, 2026. So we'll have a dual conversation about the USMCA review as well as who's going to be winning the World Cup. Unfortunately, no game here in Washington D.C. So we'll have to come visit you in Mexico City for those games.
Let me just say something. So we in the State Department, right, do a lot of things in different ways. One of it is sports diplomacy.
Yeah,
so
it's
in
important.
Mexico, the first Monday Night Football in Mexico was in 2026. 2006. From 2006 till now, we're up to 50 million Mexicans are watching the NFL. We're doing it in basketball. We're doing it in all across the board, right?
Yeah.
And so more and more, you see this cultural integration. We were honored, and you know this, Jason, to be the country of honor for the Cervantino Festival, run out of our PD shop. First time you'd think Mexico's honoring the United States with the largest arts and culture festival in the world. Well, they did. And so one of the things we did, through the leadership of Silvio Gonzalez, the head of PD, is we made our sports part of the Cervantino Festival. So boxing and basketball and baseball and wrestling, championship wrestling was actually born here in Texas, in Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
And now it's a big thing, lucha libre in Mexico, right?
Yeah.
And in other places around the world. So there's a lot we share. And I think on the cultural and sports side, and the 2026 Cup coming up is a real exciting opportunity.
I'll save it for our next conversation to ask you about your bets of who's going to be winning which games, or your forecast, maybe not bets. Another issue important for the bilateral relationship is, of course, we talked about migration, we talked about the economy and commerce, but of course security and fentanyl, right? And the traffic of fentanyl and its precursor chemicals, which remains a major concern for the United States and also a major concern for Mexico as well. What do you see insofar as maybe opportunities to help to improve security that were mentioned as part of the campaign that you're hopeful for will be implemented in this next sexenio?
So we've laid the foundation to address these issues, which are very significant issues for the security of the citizens of the United States and Mexico. Fentanyl, the global coalition, which Secretary Blinken is leading now, over 100 countries. Mexico has been a key partner in helping stem the flow of precursors into Mexico. We have ongoing meetings and addressing that issue together. Guns, which create such violence in Mexico. Most of those guns are coming from the United States into Mexico. We have the most robust effort in history to try to stem the flow of guns flowing from the United States to Mexico. On the cartels and other kinds of violence that we see in some places in Mexico. We have a strong effort going on, as we have seen with recent extraditions that have been made from Mexico. So we need to build on that. Yeah. And I think for both us and Mexico, when you look at the relationship that we have on the military side, it's a very good and strong relationship. The U.S. Northern Command and what they do together and the kinds of exercises and training that we do together, we need to continue to explore how we can make our security relationship more defined so that we are addressing it, and I say this very important point, addressing the challenge of security as partners. Yeah. And that is what we worked on for the last 3 years under our bicentennial security agreement. There's a lot more work that has to be done. My own hope is that we can create durability in the security space in the same way we have in the commercial space with USMCA.
What do you see as maybe some of the opportunities that you're you think are most possible to be able to move forward in the early term of the next sexennium to build on some of the dialogues that have happened over the course of the last few years?
I think it's on every one of those fronts. I mean, I've been ambassador for almost 3 years, and we've been working on the same issues that I started working on day one, and that's because President Biden, when he asked me to be ambassador to Mexico, asked that we transform the relationship to the positive. And we have been working on it very hard. It's been hard, and without a doubt, there are issues of disagreement that come up from time to time. But at the end of the day, the relationship is positive, it is good, and I think on all those fronts, on the supply chain integration, North American economic powerhouse, climate, renewable energy, security, migration, and the binational narrative, which you do such a great job of here at the Atlantic Council. We're going to continue to work on those issues. My own view of all this is we look at this, and I look at this personally as 2030.
Yeah.
So our plans are to keep doing what we've done for the last 3 years and looking at having a plan and framework that is very successful that we can all be very proud of in 2030.
Yeah, think about 2030 as well. I mean, I think that the U.S.-Mexico relationship has always been absolutely fundamental, but in the way that the world is changing, working as North America is going to be even more important to be competitive. Both our economic security, our national security depends on a very strong relationship with the U.S. and Mexico. And as you mentioned, 2030, President-elect Sheinbaum will be the carrying Mexico forward to the 2030s. I mean, she. So as we think about, I mean, it's hard to think about it sometimes being in 2024, but the fact that she represents kind of this bridge insofar as where Mexico will be going in this next decade, and finding those ways to work together collaboratively. And again, not just for the bilateral relationship, but what the bilateral relationship means from a global perspective is fundamental. I know it's something you think about as well, because you have the hat of ambassador, but also you've worn many other hats throughout your career.
I totally agree. The challenges we face in the world, including U.S., Mexico, right, you don't solve them in a day or a week or a month, right? It takes a long-term commitment. But the values that drive the commitment are so essential. The security of our people. We know we need to do a lot of work on both sides of the border, and that's not going to change, because President Roosevelt said, if you want to keep a strong democracy, you have your 4 freedoms.
Yeah.
One of them is to live free from fear.
Yeah.
We need to do a better job, and I think we're going to be in a better position by 2030. I'm very optimistic about what we're going to be able to do together on all fronts.
In addition to the presidential vote, of course, there was a number of gubernatorial elections this past Sunday. I think very few were surprised by the fact that Claudia Sheinbaum won the presidency. Her margin of victory, I mentioned the outset, over 30 points.
Would you call that a landslide, or what kind of terms would you all put it in if you were talking about a 30% victory margin for a presidential election? I think you'd call it a landslide.
I think I'd call
right?
it a landslide. I think I would. Okay. Yeah, that's similar?
I think so.
Yeah, and not only, it's also the fact that Mexico is not is the way the Mexican electoral system is well, right? So a 30-point margin, but wasn't just 2 candidates. There were other candidates, of course, two strong candidates. Speaking about the landslide, there was also September 1st, the Mexican Congress will reconvene with a supermajority of Morena's allies in the Chamber of Deputies, as well as the Morena and its allies within striking distance in the Senate. I believe last count, 83 of 85 seats needed for a supermajority. What does that mean for kind of the relationship, the bilateral relationship, with when the president will have such a large support within the Congress? There's also been a number of issues on a lot of the President López Obrador has wanted to move through the Congress that were not able to be done given the lack of supermajority previously. That changes on September 1st. How do you see that dynamic is affecting the relationship, and what kind of opportunities could that present for the relationship, and also what kind of challenges does that present as well?
So, at the end of the day, you have to respect and we respect Mexican sovereignty. And so the President Lopez Obrador is president until October 1, and then the president-elect will take over. But I think, and I hope the view will be and is that we're working for the longer term. We cannot tell Mexico what to do. They'll make their own decisions, even in this interregnum and in that time period, September through October 1. But I expect that the foundations of what we have built together will be part of what they will be considering as they move forward. I've not had a conversation with either President Lopez Obrador, with Secretary Bárcena, or with the president-elect on what they're thinking, is I think they'll sort it out, and they'll sort it out together. It's in the best interest of everybody for the president of Mexico to succeed. Yeah. And there's a lot riding on the president-elect Sheinbaum. It's the first woman president of North America, and she's going to be tested.
She will be.
And so, how all this comes together to have a successful Mexico and to have a successful U.S.-Mexico relationship is something that everybody's going to be watching.
And going back to the fact that she's the first woman president, I mean, the signal that provides, not only for Mexico, but frankly for this, it's a lesson for this country too, right? That we're overdue for a woman president as well, and we should look look to Mexico as well for how we should be thinking about opportunities in our own political system.
So I was thinking about that in the sense of our own history. If one thinks, I think it was 1954 when women were in Mexico given the right to vote. You look now 70, do the math right, 70 years later, you have a woman who's president of Mexico, or president-elect. You have more than half of the members of the Senate and the House who are women. Mm-hmm. You have, I think it's, I forget, 9 governors who are now women.
13 states by the end of this year.
13 states who now have women governors. Mexico, if you will, has done this in part because of the laws and the Constitution that they've changed that requires that kind of parity. You ask ourselves, how far have we come in the U.S.? We have a lot more to go on diversity and inclusiveness. So we have a lot to learn from each other. Mm-hmm. We have a lot to learn, and I hope that continues to be the case.
I hope so too, and I hope that the fact that you have a president-elect who's a woman, that you have 13 states that will be led by women governors, it also helps to further advance gender equality issues in Mexico, which are fundamental, as well as given the closeness of the relationship, hopefully that can spill over to this country as well. One other is we're looking at kind of the future of the bilateral relationship. What do you see insofar as the challenges that civil society faces in Mexico as an issue? Human rights governance, it continues to be a core aspect of the bilateral relationship. What do you see insofar as opportunities to further protect the rights of civil society in Mexico as we enter this next sexenio?
So I think there has to be a robustness in terms of the inclusion of civil society. I do that as ambassador. Civil society is very important, and their voices have to be heard, and the voices of the opposition. Yeah. I mean, with all the focus on President-elect Sheinbaum, and rightly so, for her achievements, it's also important to recognize that the voices of the opposition were making some valid points. And so how it is that you go through this time period, which I believe is what the president-elect will do, which is sort of this reconciliation of the nation, bringing everybody to the table, including civil society, including those from the opposition, to try to create a united Mexico effort to try to address the challenges that Mexico does indeed face. So a lot of work to be done, but the voices of civil society have been and will continue to be very important.
Ambassador, as we said at the beginning, this is your first public comments, and thank you again for coming here for these first public comments since the historic election on June 2nd. What's your message? There's people obviously here in the studio audience, as well as people who are watching virtually. I know I talked to people in Mexico City who are excited to be watching on ACTV, my favorite TV channel. What would you like to convey both to the American and Mexican people about the future of our relationship?
So I have been optimistic since I took this job that we're working for a better future together. Two nations, yes, respect for sovereignty, but at the end of the day, we're one family economically, and more so by our DNA. If you think about 130 million Mexicans, probably over 40 million, maybe 50 million of Mexican-American descent here in the U.S., that relationship is going to continue to flower. And I'm optimistic about it. Just even in this last year, going through the Cervantino Festival and celebrating the bicentennial, the visit of President Biden for 3 days into Mexico at the beginning of last year. So we're on the right path, and I'm as optimistic. In fact, I am more optimistic today, Jason, than I was 3 years ago. Because I think we have found a way by having this robust and deep dialogue with Mexico where we can solve problems as partners. And we're doing that every day, and I expect that we're going to continue to do that into the future.
And I think as well, what's really important that you do as ambassadors, you're not just solving these problems through the economic dialogue or the security dialogue, you talk about sports diplomacy, but also the cultural linkages between our two countries, which are just absolutely fundamental for understanding how deep and how robust that relationship is. I remember coming over to your residence and seeing I think the Chicano artist display. And so, as ambassador, you're always trying to highlight the fact that we have this relationship that extends, far beyond kind of capital to capital. It's a people to people relationship. It's a state to state relationship. It's a mayor to mayor relationship. It's unlike any other, foreign relationship the United States has, given the number of connections that we have at various points across both our federal government, but also state, local governments, and whether it's football or the World Cup or shared cuisine.
You're so accurate, and I mean, one of my hopes is, as ambassador, that I've done a little bit to try to get the eyes of United States citizens and companies on the reality and the greatness of Mexico, and vice versa. The more Mexicans come to the United States to understand the greatness of this country. And we need to do more of that. And frankly, at the end of the day, the U.S.-Mexico relationship, sometimes here in Washington, with my former colleagues in the U.S. Senate, sometimes is defined as a relationship of crisis, only looking at the border and migration. And the fact of the matter is there is so much more to the relationship. And we need our citizens on both sides of the border to go down the pathway of that discovery, and I hope more and more that happens.
And what would you say, last question, what would you say to investors that are trying to figure out their plans in Mexico based on the results from last weekend? As I mentioned before, there's a slight hit on the there was a hit on the peso immediately following the election. And as investors trying to figure out what do the results mean, what do the presidential results mean, the congressional results, what's your message to them?
Let's say confidence. Take Rogelio Ramirez de la O. He knows how the economy works. He and Janet Yellen, Secretary Yellen, have a tremendously positive relationship. We're working on a whole host of issues there. So I would say confidence. It's the integration of the economies, United States and Mexico. It has happened, is happening. There's a lot more to do. And there's a lot of opportunity. You look at FDI going into Mexico these days, it's very significant. Yeah. And I think there's going to be a lot more of that. And I think likewise, we're going to do Select USA here in Washington coming up in just a few weeks. It's also important for Mexican capital and Mexican business to also look at opportunities to invest here in the U.S. So it's a partnership. And I think the designation of Secretary de la O as continuation in Hacienda for some time ahead at least, I think there you have a signal of what's to come. Good.
Well, Ambassador, I want to thank you for coming here on a rainy Washington day. Can't control the weather, unfortunately. But want to thank you for coming here. Want to thank you as well, not only for coming here, but for the work that you do day in and day out, and for being such an incredible representative of this country in Mexico, and tirelessly advocating for how to enhance the bilateral relationship. thank our in-studio audience. I see a couple of our corporate members here from Amazon and MetLife, and the many people here in the in-studio audience that do so much for the U.S.-Mexico relationship. Our friends at the Wilson Center Mexico Institute are here as well. There's so many people here in Washington that do so much for our bilateral relationships. I want to thank all of you. Thank all of you watching on ACTV, and Ambassador, great to have you here as always.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Lleven un mismo latido en el ritmo, como quien comparte el mismo apellido, porque al fin y al cabo somos latinos. Quiero que la unión que logra la fuerza rompa divisiones y abra más puertas. Quiero que entendamos que cuando todos sumamos se hace la diferencia. Diversos como hay palabras.